talking about infallibility of the Pope, infallibility of the Church, indefectibility of the Church, and the very idea of the Catholic papacy. So I will preach today about the first point, which is, what is the Catholic papacy? And then from time to time during this summer, I will preach about other aspects in relation to the errors of the Society of Pius X. But if we want to think and to talk what is a true papacy, what is the sense of the papacy, we must look at the first pope, St. Peter. We just had his feast, St. Peter and Paul, we just concluded its octave on Friday. St. Peter, the first pope. And we picture St. Peter as a shroud and simple man of great power for good, but now and again afflicted by a sudden weakness and doubt, at least at the beginning of his discipleship. And after the death of the Savior, he manifested his primate, his primacy among the apostles by his courage and strength. And he, St. Peter, was the rock on which Christ built his church. And from a natural perspective, or psychological aspect, it is perhaps Peter's capacity for growth, for progress, for perfection that makes his story so inspiring to us. We can actually relate to him, a man who is also weak. And he reached the lowest depths on the night when he denied our Lord. And even this, the Society of Pius X presents in a total erroneous way. It is simply false to compare the denial of St. Peter with the denial of the popes, in quotation mark, of the Second Vatican Council. Because when St. Peter denied our Lord, he has not received yet the papacy. It was promised to him, but he did actually not receive it. That happened after the resurrection of our blessed Lord. But after the denial of St. Peter, he began to climb upward and to become the Bishop of Rome. He died for his divine master, and finally the keeper of the keys of heaven. But what makes St. Peter, the first pope, in a special manner worthy of our interest and deserving of our honor? It is the fact of his being chosen by Christ in preference to all the other apostles, even before St. John, as the supreme head of the church. And here we must also insert a footnote. When you talk about the head of the church has only one head, namely Christ. Christ is the invisible head, and the Pope, and every Pope, is the visible head of the church. But between the invisible head, Christ, and the visible head of the church, namely the Pope, there cannot be such a deviation, such a difference in teaching, sound doctrine. It must be the same. In other words, the Pope is vice president, if you want, of the church. And as such, he cannot change elementary rules which are established as the foundation of the church. And so, otherwise, you would have two heads. Christ as the invisible head and the Pope as the visible head, who have not much in common in their doctrine. The doctrine of Christ and the doctrine of the Pope must be essentially the same. And when you think of St. Peter and the elevation of St. Peter to the primacy of Christ's church, I must say it was a well-deserved honor, because St. Peter distinguished himself among the apostles by one great capability, by one great virtue. And this virtue must be thought today also in the man who claims to be Pope, of Bergoglio or Francis, if you can find it. Namely, it is the virtue of faith. And the virtue of faith, first theological virtue, was particularly and absolutely necessary for the head of the church. Since our Lord says that he, namely Peter and the popes, are supposed to strengthen their brethren. And how does Peter, how do the popes strengthen their brethren? It is by doctrine, it is by faith, so that they are strengthened in their faith. Remember also, when you bring a child to the church to be baptized, the church, through the priest, is asking you two questions. Well, these two questions would deserve its own sermon. It is of such depthness. The priest asked this the sponsor, addressing the child and represented by the sponsor, "What thou ask of the church?" And the answer is faith. And that means that you receive your faith through the church, that is, through the Pope, through the bishops, through the parish priests, since the church is divinely constituted as a monarchy, not as a democracy. Very, very important. And the second question at baptism is equally important. When the priest asked, "Now what does faith grant you?" And the answer is life everlasting. That is to say, we can only reach life everlasting. We can only reach heaven if we receive the true faith. And it has to come through the Pope as the highest pastor of the church. In a sense, the Pope must have this virtue of faith in the strongest, most possible way. He must be the first who believes